You wake up, the alarm screams. You drag yourself out of bed and immediately start chasing a ticking clock. Your day is already scheduled. Why does life feel like a constant race you can never win? For 99% of human history, your ancestors woke up with no alarms, no bosses, and absolutely nowhere they had to be. The morning was quiet. The sun rose. They opened their eyes when their bodies were ready and looked out at a world that didn't demand their productivity. No one was tracking their hours. How did humanity trade this natural freedom for a lifetime of endless labor? You will spend about 90,000 hours of your life working. That is roughly 1/3 of your entire waking existence dedicated to a job. But for the overwhelming majority of the human story, jobs did not exist. There was no employment. There were no careers. No one had to climb a corporate ladder just to prove they deserved to eat. Instead, your ancestors spent their days in a way that would make a modern worker green with envy. In 1963, a young archaeologist named Richard Lee went into the Kalahari desert of Botswana. He wanted to study the Dobju-Hansi people, one of the last remaining groups of hunter-gatherers on Earth. He spent months tracking their daily movements, writing down every single thing they did, and measuring how long they spent securing food. Modern experts assumed these people lived on the edge of starvation, struggling every hour of the day just to stay alive. But what Richard Lee discovered shocked the scientific world. He found that Juhansi adults only worked about 2.5 days per week. That was roughly 17 hours in total. The rest of their time was completely their own. They spent it resting, talking, and simply enjoying their lives. How could people with stone tools have so much more leisure than you do today? This pattern is not an isolated fluke. Anthropologists looked elsewhere. They studied the Hadza in Tanzania, the Ak in Paraguay, and the Martu in Australia. They found the exact same thing across different continents and entirely different environments. Hunter-gatherers only spend about 15 to 20 hours per week on survival activities. You probably work twice that just to pay your rent. Some people might argue that modern life is healthier and that ancient humans were miserable and broken, but the physical evidence left in the earth tells a very different story. Archaeologists have compared the skeletons of ancient hunter-gatherers to early agricultural populations. The difference is dramatic. When humans started farming, they became shorter and weaker. Their bones showed clear signs of severe nutritional deficiencies. Their teeth were riddled with painful cavities from grain-heavy diets. They had painful arthritis in their spines from long, repetitive hours of hard physical labor, and they died significantly younger than their hunting ancestors. The bones of ancient hunter-gatherers show they were taller, stronger, and had healthier teeth. They did less repetitive physical labor, not more. Why does modern society assume that it is the one that is advanced? The most fascinating proof of their abundant leisure is something that shouldn't even exist. It is art. In 1994, explorers crawled into Chauvet Cave in southern France. Deep inside the dark chambers, they found paintings created roughly 30,000 years ago. They saw horses, lions, and rhinoceroses rendered with stunning perspective, shading, and movement. These were not crude, childish stick figures. This was highly sophisticated art that required immense skill, planning, and above all, time. Someone spent hours, perhaps days, deep inside a cave by firelight painting these animals. They did not do this for survival. They did not do this for food. They did it for beauty, for meaning, and because they had the time to do it. This was not an isolated event. Archaeologists found other treasures. In Blombos Cave in South Africa, they discovered 100,000-year-old perforated shell beads. These tiny holes were carefully drilled through seashells to be strung together as jewelry. The nearest coastline was 20 kilometers away. Someone walked 40 kilometers round trip just to collect these shells. Then they spent hours carefully drilling them with stone tools. They did all this just to make themselves look good. Does that sound like a species struggling to survive? In 2008, researchers in Germany made another incredible find. They excavated a 40,000-year-old flute carved from a vulture bone. It had 5 finger holes perfectly spaced. Whoever made this understood music, pitch, and acoustics. They spent significant time crafting a musical instrument. It had no practical purpose for hunting or defense. It was made purely for the joy of music. Across Europe, Africa, and Asia, ancient sites are filled with decorative objects and elaborate tools. These items required hours of focused work with no immediate practical benefit. Your ancestors made things beautiful because they had the time. Imagine reconstructing a typical day in their lives. You wake up around dawn. The fire from the night before is still smoldering. Someone adds wood, and a gentle smoke rises into the morning air. You eat some leftover meat or fish from yesterday. Maybe you share some nuts and berries collected the day before. Breakfast is not a rushed affair. It is a slow, social time where people talk and laugh. They plan loosely for the day ahead. They do not do this because they have a schedule. They do it because humans are social creatures who like to cooperate. Around mid-morning, a small group might leave to hunt or gather. But here is the key. You do not go out every single day. If the hunt was successful 2 days ago and food is stored, you stay in camp. You might spend the morning working on your tools. You sharpen a wooden spear, weave a sturdy basket, or scrape an animal hide to make it soft. This is not work in the modern sense. There is no clock ticking down, and no supervisor watching your back. You do it because competence matters, because being skilled earns respect, and because making things well is part of being human. If hunting does happen, it is not the frantic, violent chase you see in movies. Humans are persistence hunters. Your ancestors tracked animals at a steady jog for hours until they overheat and collapse. Humans are the only species on Earth that can do this effectively. This is because the human body can sweat and regulate temperature while running. Most animals cannot sweat, so they must stop to cool down. They outlasted them through pure endurance. The hunt might take 3 to 6 hours of steady jogging and tracking. Then the animal is carried back to camp and carefully butchered. Everyone eats, and by early afternoon, the productive part of the day is essentially finished. What happens next is what modern people find hardest to understand. Nothing happens. And yet, everything happens. People rest in the shade of a large tree. They play with the children and teach them games. They groom each other, picking through hair to reinforce their social bonds. They make jewelry from shells, beads, or animal teeth. They carve designs into bones or stones. They nap when they are tired. Anthropologist James Sussman documented that among the Zhou Hansi, adults spend roughly 6 hours per day in what he called social time. They are not working, and they are not sleeping. They are just being with other people. They talk, they laugh, and they tell jokes. In a world without money, police, or written contracts, your survival depends entirely on your relationships. If people do not like you, they will not share food when you are hungry. So you invest enormous amounts of time in those social bonds. You do not do this because it is productive. You do it because it is how humans stay human. Then the sun sets and the world changes. This is when something truly remarkable happens. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner analyzed hundreds of hours of conversation recordings from the Zhou Hansi. She noticed a stark difference between day and night talk. During the day, conversations were practical and focused on survival. People talked about animal tracks, plant harvests, or complained about someone not sharing fairly. But at night, around the campfire, 81% of conversations shifted to stories. They told myths about how the world began. They shared tales of ancestors who did impossible things. They told jokes that made everyone laugh. They recounted adventures from far away. Polly Wiesner argued that this is where human culture was actually born. This is where they created gods, spirits, the past, and the future. These are things you can only think about when your stomach is full and you are safe. And people did not sleep the way you do now. You might think sleeping in one 8-hour block is natural. But historical records and sleep studies from the 1990s confirm that before artificial light, humans slept in 2 phases. You would fall asleep for about 4 hours after the sun went down. Then you would wake up in the middle of the night for 1 to 2 hours. During this quiet, wakeful period, people would reflect, talk quietly, or make love in the darkness. Then they would fall back into a second sleep for another 4 hours. Your body was designed for this gentle rhythm. Why does modern society call waking up at 2 in the morning insomnia, when it was once a natural space for reflection? Look at a full day in the life of your ancestors. They spent about 4 to 6 hours securing food or making tools. They spent about 6 hours in social interaction, storytelling, and playing. They spent about 8 hours sleeping in 2 separate phases, and the rest of the time was spent sitting, watching the clouds, and doing nothing in particular. They existed without needing to justify their existence through productivity. But then, about 10,000 years ago, something went terribly wrong. Humans in the Fertile Crescent began planting seeds and domesticating animals. This was agriculture, but agriculture was a trap. Once you start farming, you can feed more people. More people means you need more food. More food means you need more farming. Within a few generations, the population exploded, and there was no going back. There were now too many mouths to survive by hunting and gathering. Your ancestors were locked in, and farming required far more intense labor than foraging. You had to plow, plant, weed, harvest, store, and defend your crops from animals and raiders. The skeletal evidence is unambiguous. Early farmers worked harder, ate worse, and died younger than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. But the population kept growing. With larger populations came specialists who did not produce food. There were toolmakers, potters, weavers, and inventors. Then came soldiers, priests, administrators, and rulers. And eventually, societies invented jobs. They created employment. They came up with the idea that your time belonged to someone else in exchange for resources. By the time humanity built cities, the original human lifestyle was gone. It was replaced by schedules, obligations, and the need to work most of your waking hours just to survive. Today, you spend 90,000 hours working. Your ancestors spent way less. You sleep in one block and worry when you wake up. They slept in 2 phases and embraced the quiet hours. You spend your life chasing an illusion of greatness, achievements, wealth, and success by standards society invented. They woke up every morning already free. They were already enough. They had nothing to prove to anyone. They did not need to become successful. They were already living the life you are working your entire existence to retire into. You make art if you can find time after your job. They made art because they had time, and because that is what humans do. You are not a different species, but you live so differently from how humans lived for 99% of human existence that you might as well be. Humanity traded freedom for food security. It traded leisure for population growth. It traded precious time for productivity. The next time your alarm screams and you rush out the door, remember your ancestors. Remember that they are not the ones who were primitive.